only pays 5,000 rupees, most farmers tend to double the usage of urea, hoping that magically it will produce more on their fields. So currently, urea is used in the ratio of 8:2:1. It doesn't lead to more production, but there's always hope. It's cheap. Now, when we, even within the finance committee, the consultative finance committee, which I'm a part of, when we give suggestions to rationalize subsidies, there is a very strong resistance from the government itself. We find it very difficult to break into this particular mindset, which has existed for years. The other issue which I always have problems with when I talk to people of the business community is the difficulty of doing business in India. And it's not just macroeconomic or microeconomic policies, or even just coming up with schemes and proposals which will just incentivize money to come in. There is, at least to my understanding, there is some level of hesitation outside of India at this point of time for funds to come in, for funds to be deployed within India. I find that the kind of red tapeism, the kind of bureaucracy, and the kind of nepotism and corruption as a result of all of this is extremely high. Discretionary powers beyond a point where the culture of my baap exists in the bureaucracy. Unless you go and suck up to the concerned officer, you can't get much through. I think these are issues which are real issues. Most bureaucrats you'd find, when you speak to them, and some of them are very good officers, and there's no personal bias that I have against them, but most of them would tell you that given the environment that they've had in the last 5 or 7 or 8 years, they would rather not take a decision than take one and be questioned later of corruption. Now, in this particular stalemate, which continues to exist even now, even with this government's good intentions and good statements, it's going to be very difficult for real, speedy business processes to move in the government framework, in the regulatory framework. I think there's something which needs to be done about that. They've come up with, the government of India has come up with the Ease of Business Index, or is planning to come up with one. Some states have moved well. There's a question of an online application for environmental clearances. Some of them have come up with a one-stop shop, one-desk clearances, But again, these are so far just on paper. I think what's critical is that we need to move beyond making statements and announcements and actually getting things done more efficiently there. We've had a very good run with technology. I think by and large, India is recognized for the kind of services and technology that it's been able to generate, and the internet has certainly helped us. Even though Subir wouldn't talk about the net neutrality thing, I feel very strongly about it. I think any instances which could hamper success stories that we've had, be it in the field of e-commerce, be it in the field of software generation, be it in the field of application production, I think any moves from the government itself which would lend a shadow on success stories that we've had, and by that I mean any effort of the government to try and regulate sectors which are ordinarily doing well, which shouldn't be tampered with, I think will go completely against business sentiments, be it locally or globally. Lastly, I want to talk about one of the major issues that I've seen in the energy sector. We've set ourselves a huge target, both renewable and coal-based, gas-based targets for creating energy. And we all know energy is essential for the development of our nation, commercially as well as socially. But what we haven't managed to do, to me, that lies at the crux of the problem, is we haven't managed to convince the consumer to pay for the electricity, to pay for the energy. The governments, over and over again, tend to subsidize 70% of the number of consumers that we have, agriculture, rural India. The prices of natural resources, though rationalized in the way they have been recently by the auction route, There's transparency in the way they are allocated now. But the prices which will result out of these auctions are definitely going to increase the price of electricity. Now, you can build the best plant. You can have the most efficient project financing structure. But ultimately, if your consumer doesn't pay for the electricity, pay for the energy, be it gas, be it coal-based power plants, or be it renewable energy, which is even more expensive today's date, you're always going to have a problem with the industry. And that's where political leadership needs to step in. I think most governments, because of their political view and political outreach and perspective, tend to soft pedal these issues, tend to give a lot of leeway to their prospective vote bank of rural India, and do not take hard decisions to address these issues. I think it's about time we start taking these hard decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singh Deo. Can I now request, it's a pleasure to invite Dr. Surjit Bhalla, who is the Chairman and Managing Director of Oxus Investment, to present his perspective on the topic. He's an outstanding economic scholar and researcher, has worked with some of the most renowned economic institutions at Wall Street firms, including the Brookings Institution, World Bank, Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs. He is an avid reader and has authored many books on contemporary economy and contributes columns to leading newspapers. Over to you, Dr. Bhalla.
Thank you very much, and apologies for being late. I had to be somewhere else, so that was a scheduling conflict, not entirely my fault, but still, I would like to apologize. No, I'm not a politician, but I guess I will talk more about politics than economics. The two are linked. But if I were to think about what is it that ails India the most, and what are the constraints to growth, and what is it that we can do to move to the frontier, I think I would put number one on that list, improving the nature of the public debate in India on policy issues. And I will try and illustrate how the debate in India is akin more often than not. And I'll leave it open, and I'll challenge anybody to state where I'm, if you will, what I'm stating is not correct. Let's start off with the land acquisition bill. Now, the assumption is that the farmer loses out from land acquisition, and therefore the politicians, including those, and I think that's very accurate, I think that there are more problems within the BJP than outside, which I'll also try and address. But why isn't our debate about how does the farmer lose from land acquisition? Alternatively, how is it possible that the farmer will lose from land acquisition? That is never asked. And more often than not, and this is again with the tragedy that happened last week, I want to ask, how is a farmer's suicide or series of farmers' suicides related to passage or non-passage of the Land Acquisition Act? We can have a debate as to what the content of the Land Acquisition Act is, but we should not and must not have a debate that the farmer is committing suicide because of the Land Acquisition Act. Again, if one looks at, just bothers to look at the numbers, it turns out that over the last 10 years, the rate of farmer suicides, and suicide, as you all know, is a very complex issue. And what our politicians have succeeded in doing is to reduce it to a unidimensional phenomena that it is farmer distress, which leads to farmer suicides. Well, in that case, the farmers are having a glorious time over the last 10 years. The rate of farmer suicide is the only sector, in the only occupation, which has halved its rate of suicides. So, that certainly can't be used and should not be used as an argument for us to debate the reasoning, or for us to think about whether land acquisition has anything to do with farmer suicides. And second, if you will, it may have, I'm not talking about suicides now, but the state of the farmer, or the state of farmers in India, there are lots of very poor farmers, and it is very reasonable to conclude that many of them are in distress. Well, let's go further on that. If the farmers are in distress and they have land, there are an equal percent of landless workers in India, in rural India. About the same number, if not higher. There are about 90 million cultivators. And if you will, there are about 150 million landless workers. So we should worry about the landless workers also being in distress. So what is, one would think, if we were not debating the existence of gravity in our parliament and in our news studios, one would think that, listen, let's look at the example of 150 countries in the world. And they also have had, if you will, the same kind of problems, the transition from rural to urban, the movement away from agriculture. Every country in the world, obviously including India, has done that. Now, where else do they have this debate? Parliament or not parliament? So we can't say, we no longer have the privilege of saying, oh, we are a poor democracy. There are lots of poor democracies. So why do we have this kind of an insane, inane debate? Now, Akhilesh also said that, listen, labor law, that's a reality. I think you used the phrase, that's a reality. My question is, why is that the reality? Take labor laws, okay? There are several people within the BJP who are opposed to labor laws, which has started in Rajasthan, and in a very meek way have started in Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. Does somebody ever sit down and tell me why is it that labor laws are to be debated? That is to say, that the existence of the labor laws, which prohibits hiring and firing and various constraints and controls on the public, who loses from the existence of labor laws that we have right now? Contract laborers lose because they get a lower wage, right? Everybody else loses because output goes down, or rate of growth of output is less than it should be. The only people who gain from labor laws are those who've already got job in the formal sector. Now, how many do you think have jobs in the formal sector that we're talking about labor laws? 10% of a labor force is subject to labor laws. Half of them are in the government. So it's 5% of the labor force. I would call them, like the fat capitalists, the fat laborers. And we all believe it's politically correct to kowtow to them, and politicians kowtow to them, and believe that all of us think that that is the right thing to do, because that's the reality. My question is, why is that the reality? Why isn't Parliament? Why aren't some people in the Parliament coming out and saying these things? That as to what? Then let's take beef slaughter. Now, why is that in 2015, or even 200 years ago, but I'll give the benefit of the doubt for our inheritance and heritage, why is that a major national issue? Why is that even discussed? Why is that a law in our country, or in parts of our country, where you cannot slaughter beef, or you cannot slaughter cows, and cows have to roam in the streets and so on and so forth? You may disagree with me, and I'm sure many of you do. All I'm asking, we should discuss these things and find out. Maybe I'm completely nuts, fine. But let us at least establish as to why I am nuts, or why somebody who says what I'm saying is nuts. Then we have, if you will, again, the nature of the debate. You know, just yesterday or day before, there was a comedian at the Sri Fort who made a joke about Kalam, and in came the police and stopped the show. And you obviously have heard about the AIB case in Mumbai. All I'm begging you, please let us all be open and frank about what we see is right or wrong, starting from the politicians. I think they have misgoverned us, and it doesn't matter which party. They have misgoverned us, and they continue to misgovern us because, that's the reality. Actually, I don't buy it. Okay? And what I'm hoping for, and this is again, quasi-journalists like myself, etc., the entire journalistic profession is equally to blame in my view. I'm to blame, fine. But all I'm saying is if we want India to become modern, India to grow at a faster pace, these are some of the constraints that you have. And if you will, now I'll introduce a little bit of economics just to give you, illustrate that how this affects everything. There are 3 factor markets: land, labor, and capital. On all of them, we have the highest costs in the world. We have the highest labor costs in the world because of the fact of protection to workers or some selected workers. We have the highest land costs in the world because we're not allowed to trade land. Farmer's not allowed to seek a better life and sell his land, and somebody else is not allowed to buy the land. So the price of land, obviously, anytime you ban an item, anytime you ban trading, its opportunity cost goes up, or its price goes up, rather. And so therefore, an Indian entrepreneur, and last but not least, which is also tied to this, and this is our part of our very, very bad inheritance, is that profit, an entrepreneur, is considered bad. He's not doing social good, or she's not doing social good because she is making a profit. We have to get that out of our psyche. That is one of the major constraints, and that comes straight from one political party, which has, if you will, dictated the terms of trade, dictated the rules of the debate for 65, 66 years. And I think we need to challenge that. That is, that we can't think that we can survive in an increasingly competitive international world by thinking like we did 30, 40, if not 140 years ago. So coming back, land, we face the highest price. Labor, we face the highest price. And it so happens, because of the misguided policies of the center to help farmers in distress, we had, if you will, the highest inflation rate that we have ever experienced since, on a sustained basis since independence, which happened in the last 5 years, 6 years, of 10% plus inflation. All, in my view, and there's some evidence to support it, propagated by, if you will, the will for the Congress to go from 206 seats, or 206 seats in 2009, and 145 seats in 2004, to 272 seats in 2014. And we know how that movie ended. And so again, that is our, if you will, why we have, if you will, such very, very high costs of capital. Our interest rates are very high. Inflation is down to 5%, but still our capital rates, et cetera, have to follow. But that's part of an inheritance. Then you have, as you rightly said, on power, we have the highest cost of power. On oil, gasoline, we face the highest, because of taxes, we have the highest cost of petrol of any country in the world. or amongst the highest in the world. So no matter what market you look at, we are a very high-cost economy, a very inefficient economy, and which is what the burden of that comes out in the growth rates, the burden of that comes out in the incomes of individuals not rising at a fast pace or not rising much at all. And if you will, the real people who are hurt by that are the bottom half of the population, the very people in whose name we have introduced every wrong policy that humans can possibly imagine. They've all been done in India, and it is high time we call the politicians a bluff, call them some nasty names perhaps. Maybe one will get censored for that. But I said nasty names. You can choose your adjectives. But really, let's change the nature of debate in India. Let's have it somewhat more factual based, and then let's proceed with, if you will, deciding whether a policy is right or wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bhalla. Now we'll open the floor to questions. Can I request you to please make it short and not a comment exactly. Just try to keep it to a question. Before we actually ask the audience for the question, maybe I take the prerogative of the first question. We are adding approximately about 10 million jobs a year approximately in the country. 10 million people entering the workforce every year. And there's a lot of talk, at least in the economic journals today, that we are going to lose a lot of the jobs to automation, be it technology, any kind of technology. Now, how do we balance this, the need for growth in jobs in our country versus productivity?
I think automation is a force that we're not going to resist. It's happening all over the place, in every process, in every industry, in every activity, including the services sector, where services that were earlier provided by workers. And you can take e-commerce as an example of this, which it may benefit the logistics industry, but it has, had an impact on the customer-facing side of the business. So that's a form of automation, actually. There's nothing we do about it. But we can make a choice between the pace at which or in terms of the pace at which automation displaces labor, by doing things that make employment more attractive. And that has to do with some of the things that Surjit was talking about, which is labor reforms. For example, why is e-commerce becoming such a powerful force in India? Maybe the shopping experience, the physical personal shopping experience has become very unattractive because of traffic, because of congestion, because of pollution, whatever it is. So I think we have to look at the ecosystem in which jobs are created. There are labor regulations, there is the nature of employability, there's the way in which customers or consumers make their choices and implement those choices. Really look, I don't think there is going to be a macro approach to job generation. We have to look at it sector by sector, look at the barriers to employment in each sector, look at the skill requirements that make people productive enough to justify being employed. And that's how it's going to move. But let's not forget that the opportunity that China had most recently to grow its non-agricultural workforce, that opportunity is gone. That opportunity is not in front of us. And I don't think we should be looking back 25, 30 years at the Chinese experience saying, that's what we want to replicate, because it's not going to happen.
We'll just ask the others to, if you have a comment on this.
Subir very nicely answered that question. It's again, automation. I've got it on. Automation is not a force that you can, if you will, conquer or do anything about other than accept it. So that is the one reality. Therefore, what are the options towards us? We have to make our labor more competitive. Very simple. We can then proceed to discuss what are the policies, etc., to make it more competitive. But that's got to be the first and only answer to, if you will, lessen the impact of automation.
Kalikesh, any thoughts?
Yeah, if you resist automation, you're going to make the industry more inefficient. So that's a no-no. I think you have to just create a lot more jobs than what we think we should create even now. I think the outlook needs to be a lot, you're a lot more generous than what it is now.
Chief.
Thank you for a good discussion. My name is Rajiv Khurana, and my question is to the young politician. As a young leader, forget about the political lines. What are your recommendations to all politicians across all the parties to do some top-of-the-line things so that at least our happiness index from 117 comes down to into the top 10?
I think firstly you have to have a happy politician. I don't see too many happy politicians. And much as I'd like your comment about me being a young leader, I'm not so young anymore. Maybe when I first entered politics, I have now crossed the threshold of 40. There are major political reforms we need. And I agree to a large extent with what Surjit said. And there needs to be some major reforms in the way political parties and politicians think. Right now, it's very inward-looking. It's very myoscopic to their own political gains. I think most people who come to politics, in my view, need to have a more larger vision and should come into politics with a purpose, with a larger purpose. And politics means sacrifice, and larger purpose always means sacrifice. Despite that, I think also the conditions around the politics that we have today need to improve. So the use of caste, religion, criminal elements, money force. This is the political environment which exists today. I think these need to be reformed as well. And when I say that, I mean the people who vote for you need to vote for you for the right reason. Please remember, the politicians you have are the ones you have elected. They reflect a mindset. They may not be your mindset and my mindset, but they reflect a mindset which is present in the country.
We are at a business platform. Let's talk about top-of-the-line things, at least which can enhance the mood of business and also the gross happiness. Let's not go in terms of a very wide aspects, because we know we elect politicians, but then the people present here, they may elect just one or two politicians only and not the entire country. But people like you have to actually be the front runner to create certain changes in the domain where you are.
So just I think just to sum up that question is essentially any broad economic policies that everyone should follow. I think since we're in an economic debate.
If you're talking about an economic perspective, I think we've all spoken about what we think we need to get done. Again, the finance minister gives a 1.5-hour budget speech. I can try and encapsulate it within two lines. I think improve efficiency, have level playing field for all, have a